Welcome back to the Faith That Moves Mountains sub-series of Fashioning My Faith podcast for women by women. Again, I'm Erica Cantrell, and again, I'm here with my mom, Peggye Cantrell, and we're jumping into our second episode in this study of faith that moves mountains. And in this episode, we kind of talked a little bit about it at the end of the first, but it's a faith in the valleys and what faith looks like in the valleys in life. And when we think about faith, we focus a lot on the positives and it's going to be easy and we just expect it to be easy. We go into religion thinking, oh, I've got faith, and that's just it. There's no tests, there's no trials, no tribulations, but in life, we're on this constant roller coaster of mountains and valleys are those low points in life. And Mom, what does a valley look like to you?
When I think about valleys of life, one thing I think about is those times and periods in our life when we feel really pulled in all these directions. We feel tested, we feel tried, just the struggles of life. And when I look back in my life, a big valley that I had would have been probably those high school, college years. You've got friends that are testing you, they're tempting you, they're trying to pull you this way and that. I worked a part-time job during high school and college, and then you've got the work schedule to juggle, and was not always conducive to spirituality because there were times I had to miss services. And with those things, before I realized it, and I didn't really realize it at the time, I can look back now and see it. I was sliding down this slope into the valley because being away from church services due to work was pulling on my faith and weakening it. And to be honest, I also failed at my own Bible study at home and my own time with God, and didn't build that solid relationship like I should have at times. And that was a big valley for me. What about you, Erica?
So to me, when my mind goes to where a valley is, and we agree, we were talking about this beforehand, everybody's valleys are going to look different.
Yes.
There's going to be different types of valleys you go through, and a valley doesn't always mean a sinful valley or a struggle valley, but for me, that's what my valleys tend to be, is moments in my life where I've got to struggle or I've got to sin. Sometimes my valleys are discouragement. I'm one that can get discouraged if I feel like my work for the church is not proper or I'm not doing something to help with the work in the church. But for me, really, my biggest valley in life was a valley of struggle. And when I first got to college, it was about my second semester in college. I was just got my own apartment, and I had been struggling with the transition. Again, I got my first, like, I call it a big girl job. I worked on the farm growing up, but I started working at a hospital the summer before I started college. And like Mom said, balancing work and church and school, and whoo, it was a big transition, paying bills. And for a second semester in college, I probably did a lot too much of signing myself up for. But that was just the biggest valley in my life, because in all of that independence, independence brings sin. Short and simple, independence brings sin. And for me, I had a sin at that time in my life that I really, really struggled with. And I felt like, down south, we call it a rut. When you're like locked in, you can't go left, can't go right. Sometimes you can't even go straight, but you're just stuck and your tires are just spinning in the mud because you're stuck in that rut. And that's how I felt. It was like every time I tried to push myself forward, I tried to overcome that sin, my feet just fell out and I was right back in the mud. And so for me, a valley just feels like that true and honest rut of I can't get anywhere. I can't fix it.
Well, Erica, do you also think sometimes, and I bet our viewers have felt this way, some valleys are just, we're just really hurt. And things in life have hurt you. And you're just really struggling because you don't know all the answers. And you've got the devil trying to push you away from God and pull you away from God. And you're just trying to pray and cling to Him as close as you can because you need help and you need answers.
Yes. And like we previously talked about, everybody's valleys are going to be different.
Yes.
You may have valleys of sin and struggle. You may have valleys of distance, valleys of discouragement, valleys of pain. And the pain could be directly related to church events or church struggles, or it may be just pain of the things you're going through in life. Loss of a loved one is a big valley that many people go through. And I'm sure we're not alone in have going through some of those valleys. And I hit on this word, and it's really going to bridge us into the crux of our study today. But when we think about valleys, there's two big factors that kind of start the valley. And if you're thinking about a sinful, struggling valley, it may be a weakness in our faith. Or if you're talking about a pain or a discouragement, it's that distance. And so the weakness and the distance, they go hand in hand. And so for the first part, we're going to talk about how the more distance between us and God can create a weakness in our faith. And so, Mom, start us off with your example in that.
Well, the example I'd like for us to look at today is the prodigal son, coming from Luke 15. And let's key in on verses 11 through 13. And he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living." He chose to leave. And he went far away to a place he probably shouldn't have went, with people he shouldn't have been with, doing things he shouldn't have done. And he hit that valley hard when he squandered everything away with reckless living.
And would you say that that distance he created between, of course, this parable is talking about how we are with God, and that distance by leaving his father, the distance that we have sometimes when we leave God, did that create a weakness in his faith?
I would say it did. Anytime we separate ourselves or pull ourselves away from God, it gives the devil an open door if we're not careful.
And I'm going to bridge us into my example that sometimes the distance we create between us and God is not always a sinful distance or us leaving God altogether. But look with me at Luke chapter 18. Luke chapter 18, verses 22 and 23 specifically, we're going to talk about the rich young ruler. And so it says, "When Jesus heard this, he said to him, 'One thing you still lack. Sell all that you have and distribute to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me.' But when he heard these things, he became very sad, for he was extremely rich." And so, number one, this is the rich young ruler coming to Jesus, asking how to get to heaven, what was the most important commandments, and Jesus is talking to him, and that was Jesus's final answer was, "Sell all you have and follow me," which is, it's a big ask, but at the end of the day, like if our faith is truly there, it's not a big ask. I mean, if you have the Lord and Savior looking at you saying, "Leave all that you have."
And when you realize leaving what you have here compares nothing to what you're going to gain with faithful obedience later.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes that distance we create is a distance of substance, tangible, earthly. What's that word we use? Secular.
Yes.
Secular things. And so his riches, the things he obtained in this life, our valuables we have here. But I mean, if we let our shopping addiction or our fishing or whatever hobbies we have, if we let those come between our time with God, and it's truly us choosing that over God. I mean, when you think about work, sometimes you can't control that. And I think God, I've always been taught, grew up, my parents always taught me, God knows the intention of your heart. And we talked about that intention and that conviction in the first episode of your faith. But if your conviction is that you're letting these things, these earthly, secular things come before God, that's the distance. The distance isn't always sinful, but we put things between us and God sometimes.
I agree.
And so thinking about that and how that distance can create a weakness in faith. I mean, this rich young ruler, he he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it because of the distance. And with the prodigal son, at that time when he first walked away, he did not have the faith he should have had in this parable. It's in his family and his dad and his home. He didn't have that because of the distance he created. But it also works vice versa. And so if you think about the weaker our faith, the more distance between us and God. So not only can distance create weakness, but weakness can create distance. And so, Mom, start us off with your example of this.
So my example, I want us to look at Peter. And if you think about Peter, before I read the verses we have here, the Lord warns him earlier in this chapter that Satan desires to sift him like wheat. And so let's look at Luke 22:54 through 62. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. And Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man was also with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Poor Peter.
And so this weakness Peter had, how did that translate to his valley?
I think he had some struggles with faith and what was going on, because the apostles were thinking more of an earthly kingdom and not a spiritual kingdom. And when all this started happening in the garden and they arrested Jesus and he took him away and he'd already told him to put his sword away, I think Peter had a battle going on, trying to figure out what was going on. But then Peter went where he shouldn't have been. He went and sat with the wrong crowd, you might say, this crowd that he shouldn't have been with, and then the pressure's on. And they start saying, "Hey, he's with them. He's one of them." And Peter, I'm sure he's afraid. And he has this moment of weakness in his heart and denies the Lord.
And that denial cost him some distance. I mean, if your faith isn't what it's going to be, you have to admit to yourself at some point you feel that distance.
Yeah.
You don't feel as close to God when your faith isn't as strong as it should be. And when your faith is as strong as it should be, that's when you feel really close to God. But I'm going to go ahead and give you my example, which we were talking about our examples when we were studying this lesson. Yes. And I was like, gonna go with something else. And then you can ask my mom. I was like, I know exactly what to do. Yeah. It was like it just hit me. And this may not even seem like that fantastic of an example, but it did to me. So if you'll look with me at Judges 16, I want to propose to you thinking about Samson. And so in chapter 16 of Judges, let's start in verses 4 and 5. It says, "After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, 'Seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him, and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver.'" And so starting out, if you've ever heard the story of Samson and Delilah, you know that she's not someone God would have wanted him to be with. So right away, there's a little weakness in his faith. And in some ways, you could think of it as a little distance, too. He's putting someone between him and God. And she's got the wrong intentions. She's going to try to tear him down. And so between verses 5 and then we'll pick up in verse 15, she's been agging and trying, and he'll tell her something, but she's she's wanting to know the strength. Where's
Yes.
his strength coming from? And he'll tell her something and it's not true. She'll do the thing, and then of course it doesn't stop him.
I
And then
think
she
you would have
goes,
caught on.
you would have thought, and maybe he did a little bit, but then she
Maybe.
pulls out the big card. Let's start in verse 15 through 17. And she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart, and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. And of course, she uses that against him and gets himself into trouble. And that weakness of this woman for him to do what she asked him, because his trust in God, his faith in God, that he wasn't supposed to do that, and he's trusting someone else, and she's taking that to an advantage to tear him down. That weakness, that little moment of weakness, completely destroys him. I mean, he's gonna die. He gets his last dying wish from God to let him have a little bit of strength and to just die with the Philistines because he didn't follow through with what he was supposed to do.
Right.
And so that weakness created a vast distance in his relationship with God. But isn't it, in both of those scenarios, both weakness starting and distance starting and leading to the other and vice versa, is it not these valleys in life that we're told about that's going to be our greatest test of faith? I mean, it's that for us as humans, it's the easiest time to mess up, because if you're going through something difficult in your secular life, if you've lost a loved one or you're having a struggle, you're getting discouraged, I mean, how easy is it to step away and let someone be like, well, they were going through a lot. I mean, that's the greatest test of faith, is when you have excuses, when people will make excuses for you, but you still have to hold yourself accountable. But anyways, during these valleys, during these great tests, great trials, I mean, how are you going to get out?
Got to start climbing.
You got to start somewhere. And in that valley, staying in a spiritual valley, staying faithful, trusting God, that's how we're going to start climbing. And so, Mom, I want you to give me your example of someone who was in a valley, but they started climbing.
Well, let's think about Job. And Job had a big valley. He had so much thrown at him to challenge him and challenge his faith.
I mean, the devil himself was after him.
Yes. And he asked for him. And then even to the point when all of this is happening, the person that should have been sticking by his side, his wife, told him to curse God and die. But he stayed faithful, and the Bible says he did not sin or charge God in all of this. And because he stayed faithful, God blessed him for it.
Vastly, more than he started with.
Exactly.
And in like manner, my example is Joseph. And you think about Joseph, his valley was, I mean, his brothers sold him to slavery. Then Potiphar's wife falsely accused him. He ended up in jail.
He was on a roller coaster.
Yes. But in all of those valleys, like when he was falsely accused and thrown into jail, not once did he curse God, leave God. He remained faithful.
He didn't blame God.
No, and his faithfulness in God brought him to being like the second in command.
Yes.
Because he was able to, I mean, God's going to reward you in ways that maybe we don't even see initially. And for Joseph, maybe, you know, his ability to interpret those dreams might not have been something he was like, oh, this is the number one blessing from God that's going to get me out of this valley. He probably didn't think that. But his ability to do that is what got him out of that valley, what started his roller coaster climb back up, and his remaining faithful, just like Job.
Yes.
That's how you start climbing. That's how you get out of that valley and start getting back up on that mountain.
It's that complete trust in God, like we talked about in episode 1. Trusting that he's going to make it work out and he's going to help us through. Sometimes we have to wait on him because it's in his time, but he's going to do it.
And there's an assurance.
Yes.
There's an assurance and a substance to faith that helps you start climbing. There's an evidence and a conviction in your faith that you can't see what God is doing to help you get out of that valley, but the faith is what's going to help you get through.
And you've got to keep that hope and never give up.
Mm-hmm. And so, again, thank y'all. That was it, man.
Yeah.
But that's it for episode 2. Faith in the valleys of life, what it looks like, where to go from that valley. And next episode, we're going to look at the other end of that. Faith on the mountaintops. When we're at our highest highs, we're on cloud 9, everything's going right. What does faith look like then? And you know, sometimes those easy moments in life, those are a big test of faith too. And so please tune in with us next episode tomorrow. I'm trying to release these day by day, so please come back tomorrow if you're watching on YouTube. And please come back with us and look at what faith looks like on the mountaintops. All right. Bye.